The United States is a strange creature in modern history. It is not a traditional empire with a crown and colonies, but somehow it has walked through the entire 20th century and well into the 21st, still wearing two crowns at the same time, one as a military superpower and one as the informal manager of the global system. It rarely says openly that it rules. Instead, it prefers softer words: freedom, democracy, human rights, security, development. It has built a global stage where it often stays just off to the side, writing the script and picking the cast, while other nations step into the spotlight and speak the lines that were prepared for them. The genius and also the danger of this arrangement is that many of those actors sincerely believe they are acting out of their own independent will. That is the kind of power that is hardest to challenge, the kind that does not need to shout or force you, but quietly gets you to walk in the direction it already chose. Welcome to Political Plot. Today we're diving into how the US built a kind of soft empire, not by conquering land, but by shaping money, culture, alliances, and the rules everyone else ends up living with. To see how that works, it helps to start with a simple idea. The United States does not like to rule. It likes to lead. At least that is the story it tells. On paper, it does not conquer territories and turn them into formal colonies the way past empires did. In speeches, American leaders talk about alliances, partnerships, shared values. It's important to see the difference here. Britain once openly called itself an empire. Rome demanded tribute. The United States wrapped a similar function in friendlier language and let others feel they were choosing it. This is what Joseph Nye later described as soft power, the ability to make others want what you want instead of forcing them to comply at gunpoint. Once American leaders understood how powerful that combination of ideals and fear could be, they embedded it into institutions. After World War II, the US was not only victorious on the battlefield, it had the unique industrial capacity and financial leverage to shape the new order. The United Nations was placed in New York. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank set up headquarters in Washington. On the surface, these institutions represent the whole world. Every flag is in the room. Every nation has a seat. In practice, their rules and voting structures give the United States enormous weight. In the IMF, for example, the US is the single largest shareholder with around 16 to 17% of the voting power, enough to veto major decisions that require an 85% majority. That means any big change to the financial architecture of the world needs at least quiet American consent. Beneath these institutions runs an even deeper current of control, and it flows through money. If tanks and aircraft carriers are the visible side of American power, the dollar is the invisible bloodstream. For decades, the US dollar has been the dominant reserve currency. Even today, after years of talk about de-dollarization, it still makes up around 56 to 60% of official foreign exchange reserves held by central banks, far more than any other single currency. In global trade, the dollar and the euro together account for more than 80% of invoicing, and the dollar alone acts as the main vehicle currency that sits at the center of most transactions. In many regions, including Asia, over 80% of trade is billed in dollars, even when neither the buyer nor the seller is American. After the oil shocks of the 1970s, Washington made a strategic deal with Saudi Arabia and other major producers. They would price oil in dollars, and in return, the US would provide security and a stable financial framework. That arrangement turned the petrodollar into the lifeblood of the global economy. What does that mean in practice? It means the US controls a large part of the plumbing. International banks settle payments through systems that clear in dollars. Many contracts, commodities, and cross-border loans are written in dollars. If Washington decides to cut a country off from dollar clearing, restrict access to SWIFT through its influence over allies, or freeze dollar assets held abroad, the impact can be as devastating as a conventional attack. When Russia invaded Ukraine and sanctions hit, the US and its partners froze hundreds of billions of dollars in Russian foreign reserves and used financial restrictions to squeeze banks and companies. Iran has been heavily constrained for years by limits on its ability to sell oil in dollars and access international finance. Venezuela found itself isolated from the dollar system and watched its economy collapse even before military action was ever discussed. These are examples of what analysts call weaponized interdependence, turning a shared system into a lever of punishment. No missiles need to fly. The pain is delivered through spreadsheets, not bombs. Of course, this level of dependence has triggered a search for alternatives. Some countries are experimenting with settling trade in yuan, euros, or local currencies. Gold has gained a larger share of global reserves in response to concerns about the US freezing assets. Digital currencies and central bank pilots are being explored, partly because nations want at least theoretical escape routes. Yet, even critical reports from institutions in Europe and Asia acknowledge that any move away from the dollar will be slow and partial. The currency still dominates reserves, trade invoicing, and cross-border banking. That leaves the United States in a unique position. When it runs large deficits and issues more debt, the world still buys treasury bonds because there is no equally liquid and trusted alternative at scale. Then there's the cultural and technological side. And guns and dollars are tangible tools, but movies, music, apps, and platforms shape something more subtle, what people see as normal. Hollywood has been exporting American stories for a century. A Marvel film or a popular streaming series can influence fashion, language, and even political attitudes from New York to Nairobi to Hanoi. Social media platforms owned or controlled by US companies amplify American ways of speaking and thinking. Tech giants such as Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Meta shape the digital environment for billions of users. People are aware, at least vaguely, that they are handing over data. They accept it because the products are convenient or because the platforms feel unavoidable. This is a kind of mental colonization, not enforced by soldiers, but by interfaces, recommendation algorithms, and content that quietly centers American values. Behind these softer tools stands something harder, the US military. While formal empires have faded, the map of US bases looks like a ghost empire drawn in quiet ink. Estimates suggest the US operates around 700 to 750 overseas bases in at least 80 countries, plus thousands more domestic facilities. 11 carrier strike groups move across the oceans like floating slices of national territory, able to project force to almost any coast within days. The US spends more on its military than the next several countries combined. It does not have to fire a shot for that presence to matter. The knowledge that the United States can reach almost any conflict zone shapes global decisions long before fighting starts. NATO multiplies this effect. On paper, it is collective defense. And in practice, it anchors European security under American capacity. Many NATO members depend on US logistics, satellites, and weapons. When the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq began, the US did not act alone. It assembled coalitions, shared costs, and stamped the operations with multilateral legitimacy, even when much of the world was unconvinced. The clever part is that the war looks international. The strategy, however, is still shaped in Washington. At the same time, allies become dependent. Europe is rich, but without US power, it cannot deter a full-scale Russian invasion for long. That dependency gives Washington leverage far beyond what formal treaties state. In Asia, security agreements with Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the Philippines create a ring of partnerships around China. In the Middle East, the US sells advanced arms to both Israel and the Arab monarchies, keeping the region in a perpetual balance where nobody can dominate without American blessing. The goal is not to end rivalry, it is to manage it. The US wants regions to be stable enough for trade, but fragmented enough that no independent bloc emerges. If any region became truly self-sufficient, American leverage would shrink. Another part of the playbook is the rotation of enemies. After 1945, the Soviet Union became the adversary. When it collapsed, jihadist extremism filled the role. Today, China is framed as the main competitor. The pattern is clear. There must always be a looming threat only American leadership can supposedly handle. That narrative keeps budgets high, allies loyal, and critics hesitant. A world without a threat would start questioning why one country should keep so much power. So the shadow never disappears, it just changes shape. Inside the United States, public politics look polarized, but the deep structure of foreign policy barely shifts. Whether under Obama, Trump, or Biden, the pillars remain. Maintain military primacy, protect the dollar, guard technological leadership, and block rivals from rewriting rules. This continuity does not come from a hidden cabal. It comes from a dense network of interests. Wall Street, defense contractors, major corporations, and long-serving officials who rotate between government and private influence. They share a worldview that assumes a US-centered order is normal and necessary. One revealing trait of the American system is how it uses crises. Oil shocks consolidated the petrodollar. The 2008 crash strengthened US financial rulemaking. COVID disruptions became an excuse for reshoring industries and expanding tech influence. When a crisis appears, Washington positions itself as indispensable. It becomes the firefighter holding the only working hose, even if it helped build the wooden house in the first place. That pattern makes the system astonishingly resilient. Every breakdown becomes a justification for more coordination under American leadership, not less. This does not mean the US is invincible. It faces internal division, rising debt, and growing competition, but the scaffolding built after 1945 still holds dollar dominance, platform dominance, military dominance, narrative dominance. The result is an empire that does not speak in the language of empires. It speaks in the language of leadership, rule-based order, and shared security. Yet when a nation resists this leadership, the consequences arrive quickly. Sanctions, exclusion, pressure, destabilization. Some argue that this structure has preserved peace between great powers and enabled global development. Others emphasize the coups, the economic coercion, the wars justified on shaky evidence. Both are true. American power is neither purely benevolent nor purely malicious. It is self-interested, rational, adaptive, and wrapped in moral language that often makes it seem inevitable. And the point is not to love or hate it. When the point is to see it clearly. So the next time you hear slogans about defending democracy, ask whose democracy. When you hear talk of a rules-based order, ask who wrote the rules and who enforces them. When a crisis erupts and Washington steps forward as problem solver, look for the long-term structures being reinforced. In the end, the United States does something earlier empires never managed. It makes its dominance feel natural. It turns leadership into gravity. And like any structure built by human hands, it will last only as long as others cannot imagine a world without it.